Okay. Warbles on a lot. Sunday night, outside fire. Second half of Ira Glass's This American Life on ABC Radio National.
Somebody just stole my car.
They're talking about things people have got away with.
We thought it would be fun to try to make flamethrowers with, WD-40 and a lighter. And, I didn't want to tell them or anybody else because of 19 to get in trouble for it. So I kept it to myself. I knew it was us because I went back to the spot where I had smoked that cigarette with a friend. And sure enough, that part of the ground was blackened, and I was like, yep. Definitely, I feel horrible about this now, but I ended up getting away with it.
Malt liquor video. Cooper's Sparkling Ale, red label, 5.8% alcohol. 1.7 standard drinks. And for the malt liquor community.
Before graduation, that it wouldn't be happening for me. I was like a credit shy. And I was like, this is not a problem. Figured I'd find a way to work it out. I actually think I thought I would Ferris Bueller it somehow and actually be able to get my diploma. I just kept telling my parents everything was fine, and they made plans to come to New York and go to the graduation, and they were going to make a whole weekend trip of the thing, and they came to town, and I knew I was not going to be able to walk, and my name was not going to be called, so I sort of just planted things in their mind all weekend, like, I hear graduation's 4 hours long, I hear a lot of people aren't going, and made sure they got extremely drunk the night before and would be hungover the next day. The graduation was at 1. We were all dressed up and ready to go. I was like, you know what, let's just skip it. Let's have a day in New York and go do something fun instead. So they bought it, and we just went out in New York, and I told my parents that I ended up getting the diploma in the mail to my apartment months later, and to this day they still think I graduated from college when I didn't. Interesting side note, the only person I ever told that to in my family was my brother after he came out of the closet and told me he was gay. And I figured I'd tell him my big secret too, and he went right and told my sister because that way if they were out of him, he'd be able to say I was a huge liar. So, there you go.
Family dynamics, eh?
Thanks to everybody who took the time to call. See you all at hell. We run it at 3 of our program at 3, crime and tutus.
Crime and tutus?
I would actually warn you not to let your kids hear this next story, except the thing that the children in this next story accomplish would be impossible for any kids to do today. Basically, they go to the airport and they try to hop on a plane to go to another city. The comedian AmeriKan told what happened to Mark Maron on his podcast, WTF, which is a great podcast. They did this in front of a live audience in November 2011.
I hopped a plane when I was 12. We told my dad, me and my friend Ian, we're like, we're going to hop a plane to New York. And he was like, he dared us.
Yeah.
So we
How old were you?
We were like 12.
Oh, good. That's
so
good.
We went to the airport, and we had ballet outfits on, and we put our hair on phones. And we wanted to look really innocent. And this was, again, when flying was really easy. You didn't need your ticket to get through. And we told my dad, and we were just like, we saw there were 2 flights. We were either going to go to San Francisco or New York. And we thought, oh, let's go to New York. It's leaving early, so we went. We said to the stewardess, we just want to say goodbye to my sister. Could we go on the plane? And she was like, sure. And then she let us on, and it was a really empty flight because it was out of Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah. And we sat back there, and then all of a sudden you just hear like, the plane takes off. And we had like little ballet outfits and fun, and I was like, Hail Mary, poor Grace, and I was like, the best of the time, I was really like, the right, she's so really like, the best of the time. And then the stewardess that had given us permission to go say goodbye to my sister came by to ask if we wanted snacks or beverages, and she was like, can we get you ladies something to eat? She looked like she was like, mother. So we wondered if we were going to get in trouble, but she ended up not telling anyone. And when we landed in New York City, she was like, "Bye, ladies." It's true.
I just like
Plus the kids that get into shit will help the kids that get away with it.
Adults in this story is somehow undermining my appreciation of it. You were 12-year-old girls in ballet outfits, and everybody's sort of like, having a good time. What world was that?
It was a crazy world.
What did you do in New York?
Well, again, because I had a crazy childhood, we called my dad. We were like, "We did it!" And he was like, "Oh, Dad, Molly! Oh, she's been trying to." So basically, he couldn't.
Try to what?
He didn't know what to do. He said, "Try to see if you could go find a hotel that you can stay in. Me and Mary, my sister, will come meet you. We'll drive there." But basically, we didn't have that much. We just had our ballet bags and a little bit of cash, so we went to a diner and we dined and dashed and we stole things. We were like little con artists. So we did try to go to hotels, and my dad would call and ask, could they just stay there till we get there, and none of the hotels wanted to be responsible. So he was like, "All right, you gotta come home." And he was like, "I'm not paying for it, so try to hop on one on the way back." So we tried to hop on many planes, but the flights were all so crowded.
Right.
So we ended up having to have him pay for it, and he made us pay it all back with our babysitting money.
So that was the big punishment?
Yeah, there was no punishment.
No, I know. I mean, clearly...
He loved that kind of stuff. Like I said, he was wild. He used to...
I love the sort of strange nostalgic excitement you have for this borderline childhood.
No, it's not. It's the consequences of their actions.
Talking to Mark and Aaron on the WTF podcast. After pre-KO. Time to say this next story, which is definitely a story about getting away with it in a different way. I first need to give you some background about preschool. In recent years, there have been more and more studies showing that preschool is one of the best investments that a country can make in children's education. Probably the most famous piece of research on this is an old one called the Perry Preschool Project. The study began in the 1960s. They took a bunch of poor kids from Ypsilanti, Michigan, put half of them into a preschool program, and then the other half, just led their normal lives. And then after a year of that, both of those groups went back into the same public school system. And then every so often, researchers would follow up with these kids to see how they were doing from the two groups. They're following them still.
It just says most parents don't know how to raise kids. It doesn't say preschools are good.
Kids who got preschool were half as likely to have gotten arrested. They had an average of 50% more. They were 50% more likely to have a savings account, 20% more likely to have a car. Preschool kids got sick less often, were unemployed less often, sentenced to incarceration less often. Other studies show similar results. And the very first state to choose to make free, high-quality preschool available to almost every 4-year-old in the state, and then actually delivered on that promise, turns out to be a surprising one. In fact, only a handful of states have joined it. Alex Bloomberg from our Planet Money team reports, the story of how the state came to lead the nation in preschool access is all about getting away with it. The state is Oklahoma. And to show you just how surprising that is, consider what happened to a guy named Ron Peters. Peters was a freshman legislator in the Oklahoma State House of Representatives, a Republican. One of its party leaders, a veteran legislator, came up to him one day and said, the governor, also a Republican, appointed this task force to look into the issue of early childhood education. They came up with some recommendations. The recommendations were put into this bill. The governor wants us to pass it. Will you be in charge of making that happen?
I mean, it was pretty mundane bill to start out with. It's set up a public-private partnership, set up a private foundation.
Ron Peters said, sure. The bill seemed easy to pass and pretty non-controversial. There were no state funds involved. It was all private money. The idea was simply to set up a nonprofit to publicize the value of early childhood education so more parents would consider it. So we introduced the bill on the House floor.
I didn't think anybody would debate it. I mean, how do you debate, just the private sector was going to waste money to fund the awareness program? So, I mean, you couldn't argue about spending state money, but when they said there will be debate about it, 7 hands on my side of the aisle went up to debate against it. This is a nanny state bill. The government's going to come take our kids and raise them for us. We think kids should be raised by the mom and dad. When I was elected, I thought I was wrestling in Congress. And we got the legislature, it's like, who the heck are those people? Look at we're there. So,
You didn't think there's anybody right over you, huh?
No, but there ended up being the whole bunch of them. I got it passed, and it passed the House, passed the Senate, and then all the people started getting letters from the far right wing saying to the governor, this is the e-state bill. Why don't we just take our kids from the hospital and take them to use race force? And he got scared a little bit, I guess, and he ended up vetoing his own task force bill. So, I was terribly upset.
Actually, the governor only threatened a veto, but it was enough to kill Peter's bill that time around. And that is how unlikely it is to pass universal public preschool in Oklahoma. A bill that simply suggests that the state might think it's a good idea for kids to go to preschool. A bill, remember, that doesn't involve any state money and doesn't actually set up any new government programs. That bill gets attacked as socialism and scuttled. Oklahoma is arguably the most conservative state in the country. It's got a Republican House, a Republican Senate, a Republican governor. 4 out of its 5 representatives to Congress are Republicans, as are both its senators. One of those senators, Tom Coburn, was named the most conservative senator in Congress by National Review magazine.
Sounds like a horrible
If you need more
place.
proof, consider this. Oklahoma was the only state in the entire country in 2008 where not one single county voted for Barack Obama. So how in the world
does
did
sound like a
anyone
horrible
get the
place.
conservative state of Oklahoma to agree to a dramatic expansion of the state's public education system in preschool, something that many conservatives would oppose? How did anyone get away with that? The answer? Universal public preschool came to Oklahoma not as part of a bold, evidence-based campaign. It was snuck in the dark. And to give you a sense of just how secretly it happened, consider this rather amazing fact. At the time Ron Peters was getting his little bill squashed by his own party in the legislature, universal preschool was already in place in Oklahoma. It had been voted into law 3 years earlier, voted into law by many of the same people who were accusing Ron Peters of socialism. And what's more, they had probably voted for that law without even realizing it, which is exactly the way the people who brought public preschool to Oklahoma wanted it. The story begins in the late 1990s, and it begins with a seemingly unrelated issue. School superintendents around Oklahoma had discovered a loophole in the state's school funding formula, and were using that loophole to run a little scheme that involved kindergarten classes and huge amounts of money. So the scheme was, it was legal in Oklahoma for schools to have either a full-day or a half-day kindergarten program. The loophole was that schools got paid the same amount from the state either way. And so, what school districts began doing was running 2 half-day programs and collecting twice as much money. And if they couldn't find enough 5-year-olds to fill 2 kindergarten classes, they would pad their numbers with 4-year-olds.
We got right in the middle of that very, very early.
Lloyd Small was the school superintendent at this time, who took advantage of this loophole, ran 2 half-day kindergartens, and had a bunch of 4-year-olds, got paid double from the state.
It was like a no-brainer to not only be able to do this, put it in play, and then have money left over for others who desperately needed underfunded educational processes. Yeah, I mean, it was a good thing. And we haven't had very many good things in public schools, in my estimation, so I didn't blink twice.
All around the state, the scheme spread. 4-year-olds were like gold, and the extra money they brought in went to everything from football programs to new school equipment, even new buildings. That's what happened in the district of Joe Edens, a state legislator around this time.
There was so much money came with these children. The school district bought what we call portable classrooms, a big mobile home, you know, that's you plunk it together and you've got a nice classroom and a prefab here. They bought the buildings, paid cash for them with the money the first year. I mean, it's that much gravy, and then from then on they got to use the buildings in essence free.
Now, it might sound like Joe was happy about this, but he wasn't. This seemed like a loophole that people were abusing. And so, for 2 years, he tried to close it, to keep 4-year-olds out of kindergarten. But he got nowhere. And Joe Edens, he becomes sensitive central to the story of universal preschool in Oklahoma. You'll hear a lot more from him later, after he meets this next guy. Another main character in the saga, a guy named Bob Harbison. Bob Harbison is a self-described corporate guy, conservative suits, tortoiseshell glasses. He was for many years a senior manager at TWA, and after that, an executive in the oil and gas industry. He was also friends with people on the board of the Tulsa Chamber of Commerce. And one day,
A banker friend of mine that was the incoming president of the chamber brought me up and said, I want to talk to you about a project we've been working on at the chamber. And he said that starting in 1990, they put together a task force to evaluate workforce development issues because they were going through, Tulsa was going through a pretty explosive growth period.
the banker friend explained that local businesses in Tulsa had a problem. They were finding it harder and harder to hire employees with enough skills and abilities to do the job. The chamber had been looking into the reasons for this. Was it colleges and universities not training people properly? High schools?
We kept working back to this notion of children, increasing numbers of children not being ready for school.
This banker friend handed Bob a cardboard box filled with research and reports on early childhood education. Said, here, look this over and see what you think we should do.
We're working through this cardboard box of materials in a cubicle at the chamber. They and the staff had accumulated literature on the subject, and I became familiar with the preschool study.
And do you remember reading those studies, like was that sort of an aha moment where you're reading like these long-term effects of preschool? Was that, what do you remember your mindset then as you were working?
I tended to frame things in terms of my business experience. It was just sort of automatic.
Harbison said he thought back to his career in the airline industry, where one of the worst things you can do is fly a plane with an empty seat. But a kid who comes to kindergarten too far behind, statistically, that kid might never catch up. He's occupying that seat in first, second, third grade, in middle school and high school, but the seat might as well be empty for all the good it's doing the kid sitting in it. And also, he thought, when you look at the statistics of what happens to a lot of at-risk kids when they get out of school, they end up costing the government a lot of money. They end up incarcerated or on public assistance, bad outcomes for them and for society.
I always thought about if there was a business or a group of businesses and they had agreed to pay for all the outcomes, they would be spending money on prevention.
This cardboard box made a big impression on Bob Harbison, who in his quiet way became something of a crusader for early childhood education, making the case for it to anyone who would listen, including, sometime in the late 1990s, Joe Edmonds. And when Joe was this legislator, he had this bill trying to close that loophole and keep 4-year-olds out of kindergarten. Bob Harbison started making the case that we don't want fewer 4-year-olds in public school, we want more of them. Here's Joe.
Bob Harbison is, when you know how smooth Bob Harbison is, and millions, you know what I mean? I never knew I was being lobbied. If I was being lobbied, I just thought, boy, this Bob Harbison's telling me the things I need to know, which, incidentally, Bob Harbison was telling the truth. But that was the key, that Bob Harbison found me a willing pupil and taught me all I know about 4-year-olds.
Over the course of several meetings, Bob shared with Joe the contents of that cardboard box, all those studies and research projects demonstrating the importance of early childhood education. And Joe gradually decided that he needed to change his law and make it much bigger. He would still eliminate that 4-year-olds in kindergarten for cash scheme, sure. No longer could schools pack their kindergartens with 4-year-olds to get extra money from the state. But alongside that, he would provide for an actual program for 4-year-olds, an entirely new grade, fully paid for by the state, public preschool. And it turned out Oklahoma had a very good pilot preschool program with guidelines for choosing the appropriate curriculum and hiring qualified teachers. But this program only existed in a few districts because, according to Edmonds, the state didn't provide enough money to pay for it. Edmonds estimates the state provided only a third of the money that was actually needed to run one of these programs. Joe Eden's plan was to take that pilot program and fully fund it, so that any district that wanted it could actually get paid enough to put it in place. Now, there was only one problem with this plan. There's probably no way it could pass. No way the state legislature would ever agree to pay for a program like this. And so, Joe Evans essentially hid it. He simply offered his amendment again, the one closing the 4-year-olds in kindergarten for cash loophole, only with some new language, a kind of PS, in which he proposed a tweak to the state's school funding formula. Made it so that states got the same amount of funding for preschool that they got for other grades. This was, in fact, a massive overhaul of Oklahoma's public school system, but the actual text of Eden's amendment looked like nothing special.
The way you amend the bill, the staff takes the sections of law that you're amending and then write your amendments in underlined and line out what you are deleting language. And I just had a few words here and a few words there.
Still, there were the traditional and powerful enemies to something like this, budget hawks and limited government folks, which, as I said, Oklahoma might lead the nation in. Eden's strategy here, political sleight of hand. He drew their attention to the stuff in the bill he thought they would like, and didn't mention the stuff they wouldn't.
I probably sat down at their desk with each Republican and showed them 2 or 3 things in the bill that I thought they ought to know.
What was this thing?
Well, I showed them where it's we're keeping 4-year-olds out of kindergarten. We're saving enormous amounts of money. We can contract with private providers. They love that. That's all I said.
Now, everything he said was true. Eden's bill would allow state money to go to private daycare centers to teach preschool. Also, his plan was voluntary. School districts didn't have to offer pre-K programs, and parents didn't have to send their kids to one. So it was entirely reasonable to expect that in the beginning, at least, not too many school districts would even take advantage of Eden's tweak to the funding formula and offer a pre-K program. And one other thing Eden had going on, this 4-year-olds in kindergarten for cash scheme, it was growing. And it was feared that the 2 biggest districts in the state, Oklahoma City and Tulsa, were about to get in on it. Eden says that compared to the sure financial Armageddon that would be, his bill was the cheaper alternative.
Everybody can see that my bill was way cheaper than not my bill. If you voted no on my bill and killed it, then we're going to have enormous enrollment of 4-year-olds in kindergarten, and this was taking an immense amount of money. And all but one voted yes on the bill.
Probably because in almost all his discussions with lawmakers about his bill, Eden's left out the main part. The part about how he put the state on the hook to pay for an entirely new grade level. He knew almost nobody in any legislature actually reads all the bills, and the number of people who actually understood Oklahoma's school funding formula, you could probably count on one hand. And the strategy worked. It was a huge and costly expansion of the government's role in public education in a state more opposed to costly expansions of government than perhaps any other in the country. Stephen Dow is the director of an anti-poverty agency and a longtime early childhood education advocate in Oklahoma. He worked very closely with Joe Edens to get this law written and passed.
I think it's fair to say that the number of people that understood what was going on in terms of the adjustment to the state aid formula, that most certainly you could count the number of people that were aware of that on one hand.
Now, if everybody in the state was aware of it, would it have passed?
I don't know that I would say that I think it's likely that it would have passed.
Basically, if you guys hadn't left this provision in,
I would say had the enactment of universal pre-K not been done through this, what I would call stealth campaign, I think it's fair to say that it would not have been embraced.
The irony is, now that the law is in place in Oklahoma, it just adds evidence to the case for preschool. Researchers who studied Tulsa's preschool kids, they enter kindergarten an average of 5 months ahead in math, 7 months ahead in writing, and 9 months ahead in reading. And the gains are even more pronounced for at-risk kids who get preschool. Lloyd Snow, the Oklahoma school superintendent, says he didn't need a study to show him that. He could see it the very next year after his district started offering preschool. 1 year after we started, we had department meetings and all kinds of stuff because our kids have better word recognition, letter recognition, better social skills, better hand-eye coordination skills, better, just almost better everything as it relates to readiness for school. So here we've got all of our kids, from whatever background, I mean, they're voracious learners now. Don't start me with that
What it says is the average parent is not much good at raising the average baby or the average toddler.
For us, I think most schools. A game changer that, according to Joe Etten, the legislator who arguably did more to change the game.
And preschool gives every kid the advantage
without this strange 4-year-olds in kindergarten
that a child with a switched-on parent has, I guess.
To sneak universal pre-K through a
That's got to be a good thing.
I don't see it ever being funded. If you had to, like other states do, if you had to say, here's a program that we want to implement, here's how much money it'll take. Where are you going to get the money? Okay? If you would have to have a line item appropriation, nobody would have supported it except the young mothers, and they had no political clout.
What lessons could other states, say other states want to try to do something like that on prayer? They don't have a prayer.
Because he's done it once and that shut the gate, everybody knows it can happen.
They want to cut programs, not add programs.
The trend around the country is for more and more kids to be enrolled in state-funded preschool programs.
Good.
States as diverse as Georgia, Iowa, Vermont, and West Virginia are all hard on the heels of Oklahoma with preschool programs of their own.
They're all redneck states.
Parents, says Lloyd Snow, the school superintendent, they love this program. And statistics across the state bear that out. Remember, parents don't have to send their kids to preschool, it's voluntary.
So the hillbillies are leading America still.
Are now enrolled in public preschool.
The hillbillies are leading America still.
Universal pre-K is here to stay in Oklahoma.
Well,
Pages of our program, Planet Money, the blog, the free podcast is at npr.org/money. And our class back next week for more stories of this American mind.
yay team. Okay, Warbles on a lot to YouTube. That was part 2 of my This American Life outside fire video. Hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, that's how the fool on the hill, sitting under a gum tree in Australia, gets to keep track of what's going on in the excited states of Norte Americano. I listen to their public radio, courtesy of ABC Radio National. Ciao.